Okay, we're progressing now to our second fundamental throw, takedown. Remember the principle. Get this person on the ground, doing the least damage necessary in a position where you are in control. Now the first throw that we examined, Hayatoshi, body drop, leg trip, whatever you want to call it, was using the ankle as the fulcrum point for our leverage. What we're going to explore now is the hip throw, hip lock, Goshi in judo, number of names for it, but the idea now is we're using the hip as the fulcrum point. Now, if you examine the physics of what we're trying to do, if I'm above Brian's center of mass with my hips, it'll take a lot more leverage. I'll have to pull a lot harder to get his feet off the ground. If my hips are lower than Brian's center of gravity, then I won't have to pull very hard to get Brian's feet off the ground. In these throws, I simply want to lever Brian over, whereas in the first throw I used my ankle as the lever. Now I'm going to be using my hips as the lever. But understanding the physics of this throw is where most people fail in their attempts to try to cultivate this genre of throws. Now I'm going to be incorporating a whole lot of what would be named different throws, seoinage, shoulder throw, under the arm, with the belt, over the neck. There's various ways to do this, but the thing to keep in mind is that they're all simply hip throws. The section we're dealing with right now has to do with my hips becoming the fulcrum point for a leverage system that will dump Brian on his back. Now, since Brian is taller than me, the hip throws are going to be easier for me on him than they would be for him on me. And you guys that are chunkier in the middle, that have a more centralized center of gravity, don't think of that as a detriment. When hip throws come in, or the souffles, some of the other ways to get people on the ground hard, having good body mass is going to work for you. What we need to understand on this throw is that my belt has to be lower than Brian's belt. My center of gravity, or my hips, have to be lower than Brian's hips. The fundamental move that you have to understand about hip moves is what we call in our kids class butt bumps. I want to take a step forward, pivot on the ball of my foot, bring my heels together, and then hit my opponent's hips with my butt. I want my back to be straight when I do that, because I don't want to be leaning over. I want to be able to drop my weight underneath my opponent, lift him on my hips, then pull on the arm and kiss the opposite knee, just like you did on Hayatoshi. So if Brian's my opponent, he's going to stand with his feet about shoulder width apart. I'm going to put my foot fairly close in front of Brian, spin around, and the first part of my body that comes in contact with Brian, my butt hits his hips. Now my heels are together, and if you think about the geometry of this, if my legs are apart, I lose a certain amount of height because the legs are apart. If I'm going to lift somebody on my legs, I will lift them the highest if my legs are perfectly together. If my legs are apart, I can't lift that person as high. So part of the concept of butt bumps is understanding that when your feet are together and you do a lift with them, you actually get more elevation. When I'm dealing with somebody as long-legged as Brian, I need to get him up as high as I can. So again, the butt bump concept. You want to step in kind of at a diagonal, spin on the ball of your foot, bring your hips in contact with your opponent first, keeping your spine straight. Now I am below Brian's belt line because my knees are bent on the way in. Just doing a little practice against the wall where you try to hit the wall with your butt before any other part of your body hits. Now, if I incorporate He's grabbed me by the shoulder. As he's holding my shoulder, does he have me or do I have him? And by now you understand the concept that we have each other. It's just who can make the most advantage out of the situation. This time, I'm just going to come in, do my butt bumps, pivot on the outside foot, bring the butt in. Now, I've got my hips underneath Brian's hips, and as I push straight up, I simply lift him on my hips. I can carry him a long way. As some of you who are firefighters know how to put a man on your hips and carry him out of a scene. That's exactly the kind of leverage we're using here. He grabs me by the neck. I don't have to fight his grip. I don't want him to let go. I now have him. I'm just going to control the arm, do a little butt bump on the way in, get my hips underneath Brian's hips, lift straight up with my legs, and now I can put him wherever I want him. So keep in mind with hip throws, your hips have to be lower than your opponent's hips when you come in. It doesn't matter what kind of a grip he has on you, and I'll show you some basic fundamental variations of what you can do with the other hand, but all you have to do is control one arm, make sure you come in with your heels together, your back straight, lift him on your legs, and then you simply put him wherever you want him to go. So there's the mechanics of your basic hip throw. What I'm going to do is give you some variations on how to enter into this throw. The thing to keep in mind is I just need to control one arm or part of his shirt and get my hips underneath his hips, and this throw will be effective. If he's got me by the hair, I don't want him to let go of my hair. I want to keep his hand on my hair because now I own his hand. Come in, do my nice little butt bump. He's still got my hair. I lift him up and I throw him, and he's still got my hair. But this arm is starting to look like it's more in my control than his. So his having my hair turns into a hip throw for me. Another variation. He grabs me with both hands around my neck. He's squeezing hard. Go ahead. I'm just going to tighten my neck up. Come on, Brian. You're stronger than that. There we go. Finally, we get a little pressure. I'm not dying here. I'm going to step through, do my butt bump, and now I'm winning the fight. It had absolutely nothing to do with getting his hands off my neck, because he was holding me, I was holding him. All I had to do was come in, pivot on the ball of my foot, keep my hips together, lift him, and throw him. Those are the fundamentals of a hip throw. Other variations, he grabs me by the shoulder. There's an arm sticking out here. I can also come in and do a butt bump from and pass under this arm here. This gives me armpit control of my opponent. I lift, step towards the mat so I don't hurt him, and then kiss my left knee. The fight's going my way. He bear hugs me from the front. I'm simply going to grab an arm, do a butt bump underneath him. I've got that same control I had a minute ago. Lift him on my legs and kiss my left knee. There he is again. He grabs me from behind in a chokehold with his arm. I simply grab this, put my heels together, lift him on my hips. Now who's got whom? I'm simply going to kiss my left knee. Brian's having a bad night. Everything that gets your hips underneath the other guy leads to a hip throw. I'm in my field interview position. Brian takes a punch at me. Lock, step in. It's called Seoinagi, but all it was a fundamental hip throw. I just happened to have control of his arm as this end of the lever. The concept is get your hips underneath your opponent. Try to keep your heels together as much as possible. And no matter what you've got a hold of, just lift him up on your hips. I don't have any limbs here. Kiss my left knee. Things are still going my way, and this fight is under my control. Okay, review a little bit. Takedowns. Get that person on the ground with the least amount of violence possible, with you in an advantageous position. First throw was Taitoshi, which has to do with using your opponent's ankle as the leverage point. Pull on his arm, kiss your left knee. The second throw has to do with using your hips as the leverage point. You come in, pivot on the outside leg, on the ball of the foot, bring your heels together, and no matter how you control this arm, it doesn't much matter as long as my hips are underneath his hips and I can lift him on my hips. This throw is going to go my way. An interesting one is when somebody grabs you both your arms, you counter grab, get your hips underneath their hips, and he's still going to go down because I have my hips underneath him. It has nothing to do with which arm I've got a hold of or what clothing. The fundamental, which is what we're working on now, is your hips are lower than his hips, heels are together, lift him on your legs, and kiss the opposite knee. The fundamentals of hip throws.